is Nesky, and I'm excited to lead this conversation about Oklahoma City's role in the LA 28 Olympics, and to introduce you to Michael Byrnes, president of Team OKC. Michael brings extensive experience in sports management and community engagement to this historic opportunity. He has a proven track record in partnership building and event operations, and possesses a deep understanding of what it takes to stage major sporting events successfully in our community. Michael, welcome to the Chamber Forum.
Thank you.
All right, so Michael, you've been on the job for 2 months now already. I'm sure that flies by. And you're really still just doing a really deep dive to understand everything that's required to host our partnership with the LA 28 Olympics. Can you please tell us how that's going and what your focus is really on at this point in time?
Well, it's so great to be here today and see the level of enthusiasm for what it is our community is about to engage with. The volume of individuals that have been reaching out over the last few days to say that they're eager to meet today has been incredible, and I'm so thankful that all of you are here. Over the last essentially 8 weeks, the early stages have really been very focused on understanding our stakeholders. There are quite a few as it relates to how we will deliver this event. So, at the top of the pyramid, it starts with the International Olympic Committee, the IOC. And they have created the relationship with LA 28 to provide the opportunity that LA 28 has in that one particular year to deliver the games. And then along with that, there are the international federations. So there's the World Baseball Softball Confederation, there's the International Canoe Federation, and then there are national governing bodies, of which there's USA Softball and the American Canoe Association. So there are a wide grouping of stakeholders just related to international games overall. And then as we begin to narrow to the local environment, there are the relationships at a state level. Obviously, commerce and tourism have a strong interest in how this event will deliver. Our city relationships, whether that's OCPD or MBAR, airport, there are a number of elements across the city that we will be collaborating with in order to deliver this event. And then our venues. We have world-class venues, and that's why we have this opportunity. And so whether that's developing further relationship with Mike and Chris and their team at Riversport, or Craig and his team at Devon Park, we will be working very closely in the next over 1,000 days to really deliver the event overall. And then there's other opportunities related to vetting athlete housing. And then of course, just the day-to-day work with LA 28. So the early stages have really been to focus and understand key priorities related to those stakeholders, as that will of course just drive how the future is going to unfold.
Thank you for that, and very impressive recall of all those acronyms. That was very, very well done. Let's go into that a little bit further. Can you talk about the partnership with LA 28? What does that look like structurally? What does that look like on a day-to-day basis? Can you maybe shed some insight on some of those things?
So they are an incredible organization that is growing very rapidly. The majority of individuals that I've met from LA 28 have all joined that organization since Paris, since the Paris 24 Games. There are a number of individuals that have been there, long-term, including their chief operating officer, who has been connected to this for over 11 years. If you think about that, by the time we actually deliver the games, he'll be approaching 15 years working on this one event, as he worked from the bid stage through the awarding of the games to present day. But from a large-scale perspective, LA has very ambitious goals. LA is eager to produce the biggest and the best games that have been produced. Learning a little bit about what that meant, when you think about Los Angeles hosted the Olympics in 1984, and this games in 2028 will have double the athletes and double the venues of what they had, from a scale at that stage. And Casey Wasserman, who is the chair of the Los Angeles Olympic Host Committee, he was in town for an NBA Finals game here recently. And hearing him speak to a small group, one of the things that really struck me was this is the equivalent for LA of delivering 7 Super Bowls a day for 30 days. So as you think about the Olympic Games itself and then the Paralympic Games, that period of time, this is a large-scale operation. And so we have a responsibility, obviously, for our portion of that. And it's going to be really critical that we deliver it for them. The primary interactions with them have really centered with the event venue management group so far. And they have a wide range of interests. And so they're thinking about all the elements related to experience, whether that's guest experience, whether that's the athlete experience, broadcast, competition itself. They are also focused on general operations, safety and security, transportation, village management. They have stakeholder services, which could look like press, or broadcast, or games family. The athletes' families, there's a wide range of those stakeholders as well. And then they have supply, and thinking about the volume of individuals coming to and from our venues, whether here locally or in Los Angeles, and then replenishing that venue and making it ready again for tomorrow's events. So they have a lot of logistics related to that. So that's only a portion of the overall kind of contingency that is LA 28. They have 49 different functional areas. Essentially departments. And so I'm beginning the stages of meeting a number of them. They had 2 contingents over the last 2 weeks that came to town and had the chance to tour our venues, learn a little bit more about our community, really be wowed by our community. For a number of them, it was their first time here. And so the relationship is certainly in the early stages, but it's growing with LA 28, and there's such high frequency of working with them that'll only continue.
Thank you for that. And I do think one of the things about what we're going to be experiencing here in 2028 is just trying to put words to the sheer scope of this event is difficult in a lot of ways. But we know that it's bigger than anything we've ever seen before. And we know that it very, very much revolves around the games themselves and the competition itself at the end of the day, but there's so much more to it than that. Can you speak to the elements of this hosting opportunity that you're working on and planning right now, both leading up to the games themselves being delivered, as well as the things that are going to be happening throughout town during that time frame as well?
So we had the chance, as I mentioned, we were in venues. We were, over the last 2 weeks, very concentrated at the venue level with how we will ultimately understand all the elements and all the pieces of bringing the games together. But to your point, it gets beyond just the venues and their sites. So it's parking rides. It's the logistics of all those supplies that I referenced and having the ability to house those and get those delivered to each venue in a timely manner. Athlete housing will be an important element. We'll have close to 200 athletes and then technical officials that will be hosting our community, so providing a unique experience for them. Interesting, I say unique. LA also wants it to be very similar to the experience that the athletes, they want equity in terms of what the athletes in Los Angeles are going to experience as well. So there's a lot of interest that we deliver at the Oklahoma Standard and do something that's unique. And at the same time, we're part of this larger global organization, so working in partnership with that. So those are some of the small pieces, but 2 months ago when I sat down in the chair, I anticipated that my early stage work was going to be about what are we going to do between now and July of 2028. And it turns out I haven't been able to focus too much on that just yet. But overall, the thought process there is we have 1,122 days, not that I'm counting, to really maximize this event. And by maximizing, to me that means what can we do really at the tail end of 2025, in 26, in 27, that continues to build the momentum around this event and makes it tangible and accessible to as many people in our community as possible. Overall, there's, it's understood that there's a fixed capacity in each of our venues in terms of actual how many people can get in the building and watch competition. But I want, and I have this goal, that we have to make this broader than that. So what are the ways that we can get as many people to touch and feel the Olympic experience? And that could look like on venue or off venue. It's activities and activations throughout our community. It will look like a torch relay at some point that'll come through not only Oklahoma, but the ambition is that it'll actually pass through all 50 states, as LA is really positioning this as America's Games. So there'll be some planning and coordination around that. And then I really have this passion for what can we do from a youth engagement perspective. And we want our youth to maybe learn a little bit more about the two sports that'll be activated here in our community. But overall, how do we get them just more active in general? And so there'll be a lot of thought and planning that'll go into all of those elements. And I think that's what's going to allow us to really build momentum and build excitement and make it so that 10 or 20 years down the road, so many people in our community are going to say, yeah, I had a part of it. I was able to attend an Olympic event. I was able to really, experience what this means as one of the, the largest global events that gets produced. Speaking of large global events, you had the chance to attend the Olympics in Paris, and as an individual that has background with a number of large events, you've seen us produce as a community events here locally, national and international events. After walking away from Paris, what's your understanding of the scale and scope of this event? How will it be different?
Yeah, great question. It was an incredible experience. I would say it was a very different experience from hosting large-scale domestic sporting events, whether you're hosting a Super Bowl or a college football national championship, or obviously the best example right now is the NBA Finals. When you're hosting those events, you can feel it in your city. We love to see everybody wearing their Thunder shirts to the office on game days, and we love to see all the painted windows, and we can really feel the energy pick up downtown around 4, 5, or 5:30 when everybody starts swarming in for the activations taking place everywhere. What I would say the biggest difference and takeaway for me is that the Olympics was a lot less of an event being in your city, and it was much more of a complete cultural takeover. Like, there was no aspect of the time spent there where you weren't just completely enveloped in this Olympic atmosphere, which was incredible. I would also say, just from the customer service standpoint and from the logistical side, there's so much more detail and process that has to go into everything. I mean, it was the second you get off the airplane, there's signage directing you to get your ID badge, or to, this is where you go for resources so that you aren't getting lost, or this is where you go for translators so that you understand where you are, where you need to go, and what you should be doing. And so there was just it was very evident how much planning went into that, because you are welcoming people from all over the entire world. It's not like bringing people in from Indiana or California or Ohio. You're talking about hundreds of different languages being spoken, which is a challenge and an opportunity. And there's almost an assumption that everybody that was there for the same thing. You couldn't go to a restaurant, you couldn't go to a hotel, and it not feel like it was all part of the Olympic experience. So that certainly stuck out to me. And then lastly, the other thing that I would mention is just the way it differs from other traditional events, and certainly ones we've hosted in Oklahoma City in the past, is the scope of it and the amount of involvement from the local community is drastically different, in the sense that there's so many different activations and partnerships throughout the destination, and that could be the largest global sponsors all doing things for their constituents, but that's also the local organizing committee and the local community really putting on private events that complement everything that the competition itself is doing. And so I think that's what's really exciting, and I'm sure you can dive into it a little bit more later, but I think there's going to be a lot of opportunity for community involvement and community engagement, and I think that's going to be really exciting for us to really embark on.
How many venues were you able to visit?
That's a great question. I was highly focused on canoe slalom, so I went to one competition over and over to make sure that I could see and learn as much as I possibly could about that operation, and otherwise got to walk the city, see all the various different aspects of the things that they were hosting throughout. But in terms of competition itself, I got to go to one. But I left thinking, we can do this. I think we can do this better. And this is a tremendous experience that people I just don't think are wrapping their heads around quite yet. In Paris, there was north of 12,000 people at these events, and when I was asked, I told people the atmosphere to me felt like the Women's College World Series, which I explained to people feels like, to me, more of a college football game type atmosphere than a lot of professional events, and that's what I felt at Canoe Slalom out in Paris. So it's very exciting. There is a huge fan base for these events, and they come ready to rock, and so that's going to be a lot of fun.
I've heard a little bit about transportation to that venue. What was your experience in terms of the planes, trains, and automobiles to get there?
Sure, yeah, like I said, so the airport itself was great. Again, you couldn't step off the plane and not know where you're going or where you needed to go next. So they certainly had those large-scale things organized down to a T. In terms of the venues itself, that's the challenge of hosting such a wide array of sports in one of the world's largest cities, is that just geographically it's difficult when everything is so spread out. So the example was that in Paris, our hotel was near downtown, but the venue itself, which was built for the games and to house the Federation long term, it all in all took about an hour and a half one way to get out there. And that involved their public transportation subway system, that then involved transferring over to a bus, and then that then involved probably about a mile or so walk to get to the venue. And that was expected. It's not like people were absolutely blown away by that concept. It was just part of what comes with these games and the nature of having so many different venues and so many people going to so many different places all at the same time. But my one takeaway from that whole experience, though, was the signage and the direction throughout was incredible. This was actually my first time traveling overseas, so I was a little bit worried about am I going to know what I'm doing? Am I going to know where I'm going? But I never once got lost. I never once was confused. Once I knew where I was going to, the resources were all very much there to get me there directly. And that was something that I certainly appreciated in comparison to some of the other events that I've been to that made me feel a little more chaotic and a little more figured out.
As an individual with a little bit of baseball in his background, I've thrown Adam a couple curveballs there. We went off script for a moment.
That's okay. We both work in sports. We're good with curveballs. Given the scale of what we're talking about, there's so many pieces of this, though. Like some of the things I just mentioned, some of the things you've alluded to with some of your earlier answers, but there's so many different aspects to what's going to be taking place. There's complications that come from security and transportation, transit in and out of these facilities. Like I mentioned, there's so many logistical details. How does this differ from some of the other major sporting events from your experience and your perspective?
Scale is the operative word there, and you gave us some of the examples in your Paris experience. We had the opportunity over the last 2 weeks, about a dozen or so LA 28 folks had the chance to come in town, observe the Women's College World Series in action 2 weeks ago, and then a whole other contingent came last week. And that really introduced me to just the level of detail, the level of attention that goes into these events. The IOC, if you think about it, have been producing these events for well over 100 years. And so they have perfected in an iterative manner the delivery of these games. And so as we are looking at the venues themselves, there will be an intense venue overlay that one of the functional areas from LA 28 will really focus on what is all the layers of detail. So it's the venue approach, which you were talking about, your modes of transportation. It's the arrival at the venue. It's our overall perimeter and the safety and security of that. It's the functions and the way to engage fans from a front of house standpoint once they have arrived and been through their screening. And then how will the back of house operate? All of that, not even to mention the field of play. And so from a venue overlay, that is just a kind of a microcosm of the volume of detail. So there are a couple different A&E firms that are studying both venues, and we've had the chance to be in every nook and cranny and every closet again so that they can understand how they can bring all the services that need to deliver the events themselves, how LA28 and Team OKC can deliver to our stakeholder partners, whether that be Olympic broadcast or the press, and all the other stakeholders. So there's just an intense level of thoroughness that I feel like I'm a pretty detailed individual, and we really scratched, I think only scratched the surface in these site walkthroughs in the last 2 weeks, and it's already just very apparent just the amount and the volume of thought and consideration that goes in, and that's, to date, that's really just inside things.
Yeah, and I would even add on top of that too, of course, coming from the Visit OKC and Convention and Visitors Bureau side of things, there's a unique perspective there, but there was also just the preparedness of the hospitality community and how important that piece was. Restaurants were prepared, hotels were prepared, they knew that they were going to be expecting guests from all over the world, and those things were ready to go. They were ready to translate, they were ready to provide answers, and that just allows the experience to elevate so that the focus can really be on the details pertaining to transportation and logistics and everything that goes into the games and execution itself. But with that being said, we do have a couple of more direct, hard-hitting questions for you here, Michael. And so one of them is going to be, do we know how many people we're expecting to come to Oklahoma City for the sliver of the Olympics that we have the opportunity to host?
If you wanted me to have an answer after 8 weeks on the job for that, you would you'd be really optimistic. But I think there's a scale element to it to maybe begin to think about. So as we understand during games time, right now we believe there's going to be 9 sessions of canoe slalom and then 17 sessions at softball. And so we're all familiar with the venue at Devon Park and how that venue is able to deliver on the Women's College World Series. At River Sport, there'll be the opportunity that we'll bring in seating and really create a spectator atmosphere there that you wouldn't see on a normal day-to-day perspective. But it will give us the opportunity for a number of events over the course of those 16 days to have people physically attend. And then beyond that, I believe there's opportunities to, whether we look at people being on the grounds but not necessarily spectators, or events throughout and activations throughout our community. With our central location in the United States, I believe we're going to be really accessible to a lot of people that want to be part of America's games and maybe aren't prepared or don't have the opportunity to travel to Southern California. So I believe there's going to be a wide range of people here. And the point that you were emphasizing a moment ago, beyond the venues themselves and the 2 sites, it's all of the opportunity from hospitality, restaurant, or retail perspective to greet every one of these individuals and really deliver on the experience that we as Oklahomans provide in every instance that we host. The LA folks, some of them from Southern California, some were international. They were, as to be expected, as we all have known to come to expect, they were just blown away by how they were treated here in our community. And so we're going to have that on an international scale in 2028.
That was a great answer, and that's why when I get that very same question all the time, I say, you should ask Michael Byrnes. Here is his email address. Fantastic. So we've talked about everything that's going to be, in generality, we've talked about all the different things that are going to be taking place here in Oklahoma City. Can you speak in a little bit more detail, if possible, again, at this point in time, what's that experience going to be like for residents, from tickets that they may have access to various different local events, fan festivals, activations throughout the destination? Again, still a little early in the process here, but is there any details you can share in that regard?
I think the point to emphasize is that it will start early. And so this week had the opportunity to work with the ticketing functional area from LA and understand a little more detail about what their process will look like. And the process really will kick off later this fall in terms of beginning to generate interest. They won't put tickets on sale per se, but they'll be creating opportunities for people to essentially raise their hand, get registered for tickets on sale. And there'll be a variety of different drops in their terminology, whether it's through stakeholder groups or through the general public, or in our instance, some local opportunities to access tickets. But I think what's already struck me in the 8 weeks I've had in this chair is the opportunity we have to really maximize events that are going to occur, many of them international events, between now and July of 2028. So a great example, later at the end of this summer, in September, at Devon Park, we're going to host the WBSC U18 World Cup. And then we'll be planning towards, there's plenty of plans already in place, towards a 2026 in July delivery of the International Canoe Federation's World Championships. Those are only two of what I believe will be multiple examples of international events that are going to be coming to our community that we have to show up for those events too. These are going to be ones that will deliver confidence to LA28, to the international federations. These will be ways for us to connect with those international events, maybe learn a little bit. I'm still developing my vocabulary around paddle sports. So these are really important opportunities for us as a community to show up now. We're going to have a fantastic event in July of 2028, but there's really so much that will occur between now and then. In terms of things that Team OKC will be really focused on, I think we don't want opportunities or different milestones to pass, whether it's celebrating 1,000 days out from the games later this fall, or maybe the 1 year out from the games in July of 2027. Being able to go and do a number of youth activations and get kids connected to an active lifestyle, being outdoors, either learning paddle sports, learning baseball, softball, being connected. I think there's going to be a number of opportunities, and we're going to begin to not only develop those, but develop the methods of how we're going to communicate that, and building databases and making sure that there's plenty of awareness around this, because we're going to be asking whether it's businesses or just members of our community to have a level of awareness and to show up and be part of it.
Great, thank you. There's also been a lot of speculation about Olympic Village and Athlete Village. And this is a question that I think you've probably gotten before, but is there any insight or detail you can speak to in regards to how we're planning to house the athletes? This is a little bit of uncharted territory in having 7 competitions separated away geographically from everything that's happening in Los Angeles. Can you speak to that process at all?
Well, to think on a broader scale on one of the motivating opportunities around how our community is hosting or staging these events, it goes back to a passion from the IOC on not creating new infrastructure that doesn't have long-term use. And so we have incredible facilities here, and that was the thread we were able to pull. A number of key individuals in our community were able to really create a confidence that Oklahoma City could deliver on these events to the key stakeholders in LA. And so that's why they're that's why we're going to be hosting these 2 events. So along with that is our obligation to make sure that we're using as much existing infrastructure in the community as possible. And so we spent some time around the community last week, candidly, looking at opportunities. There's a much further process that needs to develop in terms of finalizing where the athletes will stay. But we won't be building new in order to host the athletes. I referenced it, but as a reminder, on the grand scale of athletes for the Olympics, we're going to have about 200 here, and so that's a number that we can accommodate. That's a number we can really deliver on with what we have in our community, and so it'll really just be finding some of those opportunities, finding the right opportunity that provides the experience, an equal experience that LA28 wants to provide for all their athletes. But I think that exists already.
You talked about this a little bit earlier, but there is some tremendous opportunity in terms of build-up or test events that can be looked at from multiple different perspectives. You mentioned ICF World Championships that'll be here next summer. We talked about WBSC, which will be here this fall. Obviously, we're in a unique position where we have the Women's College World Series taking place at Devon Park every year, which provides a sellout type event that we can maybe test some things out or learn some lessons on as it leads to 28. Can you speak to any other opportunities or details about what this buildup is going to look like? Because it's not just going to be dropping in 2028, right? We're going to have athletes presumably coming here, months or years in advance to train. There's going to be site visits from all those different stakeholders that you rattled off earlier. Anything else to touch on in regards to the buildup to 2028 and some of the test events and how we can learn from that, both from an operational standpoint, but also from the community element?
As you speak about test events, that was a phrase I had to better understand. You know, ultimately, as I began to understand it, baseball terms, spring training, right? Like utilizing the events, not only from an athlete standpoint, really from a competition standpoint, to test out some of primarily technology and level of preparation. So an important element that impacts many of the disciplines in sports in the Olympics is timing. So the partner, Omega, has a real critical role in delivering results for all competitions across the Olympics. And so there'll be a need for them to get into town, be on site, understand all of the nuances, and maybe speed up their processes a little bit. So that'll be an important element. There'll be other iterations as we host events that members of LA's 49 different functional areas will want to come into town and just see how our buildings operate. The test event piece is really important. And then we've spoken about the lead up, but boy, I really don't want to miss out on any momentum. And so all of the ways that we can really use this message as we're recruiting individuals to come work for our businesses, as we're recruiting businesses to come locate in our community. All of these things become really important as we can point to just multiple iterations of what's going on in our community between now and the next 1,122 days.
You're still counting that number, I like it. Let's talk about what's next. So in terms of the planning process, what are you looking at here in the near future? And then especially for this audience, what are some of the ways that you're anticipating engaging the community with some of those next steps?
So the staff of Team OKC, currently just one, will need to develop, certainly, and had the chance understanding much of the LA 28 experience and a number of individuals that have had past Olympics experience over the last 2 weeks to understand how will we grow what is Team OKC. So already in the last 14 days, many iterations of what I think that staff is going to look like. But there'll be a need here in the very near future to grow staff, and that really is driven by from Los Angeles perspective, like they've opened the faucet now too. They've been waiting for this to be final, just like we all were, and now they're seeking all kinds of information to better understand how they're going to deliver their particular areas. As we get broader than that, I expect that there'll be a build out of a board of directors and board of advisors that'll help really shape what we want this games to be, we collectively in our community. And so there'll be the formation of that in the relative near term. I want to make sure that there's some formality around having a volunteer program, and so it'll be really important that we have that prepared before we really roll that out. And then I anticipate there'll be some opportunity for committee level work, and I'm sure my initial stab at this will only grow, but I expect there's going to be committees around the volunteer development as a whole. Like, how do we go recruit the volume of volunteers that we're going to need? So as an example, last week, an individual, a very experienced Olympic staff member from LA 28, this will be his 5th Olympics, as we talked about just the overall operation of Devon Park, he looked at it and kind of off the cuff said, I think you'll need 1,000 to 1,200 volunteers a day over the course of the, 8 days, Craig, right? That we'll have events there. That'll need to get refined. Is that the true number? Who knows? But it's far beyond what I would have guessed if Tim looked at me and said, "How many volunteers do you think you need?" Just in that one venue. So it'll be venue based. It'll be around our transportation system. It'll be around park and ride. It'll be around ancillary events and shoulder programming and activations. And so we'll have this wide need for volunteerism. So that development of that will be important. The overall visitor experience. I think we'll have some really talented people, many in this room, that can help us shape what do we want the experience of everyone coming to Oklahoma City to be when they're here over the course of those 16 days of competition and hopefully many days on the front end and the back end. I've referenced the momentum events. So what can we develop between now and say Q1 of 2028? And so having a number of smart brains around those events and what can they look like and how can they be as diverse as possible and how can they touch as many parts of our community as possible. And then there'll be what community events will we have during games time. And so I think that's a whole separate group that'll be focusing on what opportunities there are for the games itself. And then one of the things that's really important around Olympics and every community that's hosted the Olympics is legacy. And what will the games leave behind for our community, whether that's physically or from programs or just opportunities that have been developed as a result of the games being here. So I think that'll be a key area that I'm certain many of you will want to raise your hand and really give us feedback on and shape the thinking around that. So that's probably a third of what the volunteer committees will look like. I think those are the ones that are readily apparent right now. I'm eager to really begin to further the recruitment efforts. There's been plenty of people that have already raised their hands and said, I want to volunteer, I want to be part of this. I want my entire organization to be a part of this. And so we'll formalize that. We'll develop that out a little bit further. But I think those may be some of the areas that people might actually be influencing as they're part of the volunteer system.
Excuse me, I have a question.
We'll take some questions at the end if you don't mind.
We're close.
Yeah, we're getting there. So you have touched on so many different aspects of the event. There's so many different areas that clearly you have put some considerable thought towards and are really going to need to be built out and developed here over the next couple of years. So I guess one of my questions would be, and this is not necessarily an easy one, but what keeps Michael Byrnes up at night right now? Seems like you have a long list you could potentially choose from.
There is a long list. And I think I kind of just touched on an important element. I want to make sure that this delivers for our community. And I'm certain we'll produce world-class events. That our organizations and our venues, they have the muscle memory to do that. So I'm just really focused on what is that legacy piece? What does this really mean to all members of our community? And how do we uncover as many opportunities, I think, as there could be? That's a big area of focus, and it's one that, with the rhythm of doing the actual work, I haven't really had the quiet time to spend on that. So that's where the up at night portion comes in. But I think that's really kind of one of many things. But it's an important responsibility from Team OKC's perspective on delivering on behalf of everyone in this room and everyone across the entire community that this is something beyond just simply a sporting event.
Well, I think we touched on a lot of different things there. Is there anything that you think maybe we may have missed that you still wanted to take a chance to mention before we go ahead and wrap up and open the floor for some questions? It wasn't a trick question. I think we covered a lot.
We did cover a lot. Clearly, there's an eagerness to ask some questions. I think we can certainly do some of the questions.
Well, Michael, thank you for the insightful discussion.